So to start, we're going to be making 5 different basic brushes. We're going to be making a sketch brush, a liner brush, a shader, a color block brush, and a stamp. So we're going to click on the plus sign to make a new brush. We're going to start with our sketch brush. And this part will allow us to increase the spacing or decrease the spacing depending on what we want to do. So I like to do it between 10 and 15 for a sketch brush, just because I like how close together it's going to be. And then next, we're going to go to the stabilization. This makes it so it can be smoother when we draw and kind of more close together so we don't have any stray lines going around. But for this one, I don't really like to do any stabilization on sketches, just so I like my lines loose. So we're not going to do anything on that one. Next is going to be our taper setting. So right now, our ends are going to be pretty rounded out. So by putting those closer together, we're going to increase the taper. And by increasing the size and opacity, it's going to make that more visible depending on what we want to do. Just kind of playing around to see what works best for what I kind of wanted to do. The tip is going to make it kind of more round the harder it goes, and then on the way left it's going to be more sharp. So we're just going to create that out. See if this is what we want to do. Alright, now we like how it's going to go. We're going to go over to our shape setting. In this one, we can kind of change what shape we want it to be. So the Procreate library actually has a ton of different preset sources that we can choose from. So I'm just going to go through that a bit, show all the options, just so you can get kind of an idea of what Procreate does offer. It does offer quite a lot, so you don't have to start completely from scratch. So I'm just trying to choose which one I want. I kind of like to do acrylic square for my brushes. Just trying to show what that looks like. And then for scatter, it's going to kind of break up those little squares. Rotation is going to turn them around. Count is going to increase the amount of shapes we do have. And the count and jitter will kind of move the count around as well. Next up, we're going to move on to grain. Grain will also hit that edit. To import, go to source library, and then we can kind of go through all those again. They also have a ton of different grains that we can choose from. But I kind of like recycled paper for my sketches. So it's going to give us that little preview of what the brush is going to look like now. And next rendering, we can do light glaze, uniform glaze, intense glaze, heavy glaze, uniform blending, or intense blending. I really do like doing intense glaze for most of my brushes, but you can always figure out which works best for you. Next is wet mix. We don't really mess with that. Color dynamics, there's a ton you can play with, but for sketching, I just kind of like it to let it be. Dynamics, you can always mess with the size and opacity will increase and decrease how big the brush is going to be. Jitter is also going to kind of move around those little shapes. Next for Apple Pencil. Apple Pencil is just going to kind of mess around with how the Apple Pencil behaves whenever you're using the brushes, but this doesn't really matter much if you use a finger on Procreate instead of an Apple Pencil. Next is properties. This gives you lots of good things. Maximum size is how big your brush can be and how small. The maximum opacity it can be or minimum opacity. Preview size you can kind of mess with to see how you would like your brush to show up on the brush library to make it easiest for you. I like to have it kind of medium size, so that way you can kind of see it well. And I don't really like to do the stamp preview, just so I can see how it actually look like as a brush. Materials we don't need to worry about. And now we can name this brush. We can sign it with our little names, and we can name it whatever we would like. So this one I'm just going to name in sketch brush, and then click done. And then we can kind of see how that's gonna look. Decrease the brush size, see what different it looks like at different sizes. Do a quick little sketch just to see if we like it, if it works out for us. Alright, I think we like how that looks. So we're just gonna go ahead and get rid of that. We're gonna create our next brush, which is gonna be our liner. So if we hit that plus again, we can go ahead and move with the spacing again. Again, I like to have it kind of on the smaller side for lining. For stabilization, for liners, I do like to increase the stabilization just to make it a bit easier. So we have those smoother lines. For liners, I do like to add a little bit of a taper. So we'll just go ahead and we'll do a little streak so we can see how that's gonna look. Toss it around a little bit more. We can clear that drawing pad. We can kind of decrease the size, play around with it a bit to see what works best. And you can, of course, always change how much you want it to be tapered as well at the top there. Next, we can move on to shape. For liners, though, I do like to keep it that hard circle. It just makes it a bit easier. For grain, I also like to keep it at that hard, just that plain white one, just so we don't have any grain in our lines. For rendering, I do like to have it at an intense glaze, but again, that you can always play around with that. Dynamics we don't really worry about. Owl pencil we don't really have to worry about too much. Properties, I do like to increase the maximum size and the opacity. Just so we get a nice, hard, clear brush. Alright, and then again we can sign this one and name it. This one we're going to name just liner brush. And then we can sign our name. Click done. And then we can test that one out as well. See how it is thick, and then we can also see how it is smaller. Test it on our little mini sketch here just to see if we like it. And that looks pretty good. So we can move on to our next brush. We're going to erase this. And then next, we're going to make a shader brush. So we click that plus sign again. Alright. And for this one, I want to bring down the spacing quite a bit, just so it's nice and tight. Stabilization, I don't really add any to the shaders. Taper, I don't add too much of a taper to these ones, because you don't need too much of a taper on the shading. Shape, I do like to change the shape on it. I like to do either ultra soft, soft, or medium. For this one though, I'm gonna do the ultra soft, just to make it nice and soft. For green, I think I'm just gonna let it be. Glaze, I like to do a light glaze or uniform glaze, just to keep it nice and soft. See how it behaves whenever we use lighter pressure or more pressure. Color dynamics we don't really have to mess with. Normal dynamics and alpha pencil I don't really need to mess with on this. But we can a bit just to see how it's going to react. Properties, I like to be able to increase the maximum size just to see if we need to, we can get that really big shade without having to do too much work. And then again, we can name this one, we can just name it shader brush. And of course, sign our name. And then we can go and decrease the opacity and see how it kind of reacts whenever we use it. Right, now that that looks nice, we can get rid of that. And then we can move on to making a color brush. For color, again, lower that spacing. Stabilization, I don't really need to worry about with color. I don't really taper it at all either. Shape, I do like to keep the hard circle. But there is a bunch of different shapes, depending on what you want. I do also like the oval, slim oval, just so you can get unique shapes and lines. Next up for green, I do like keeping it this plain one that it comes with. Next up for dynamics, I just kind of leave that little, mess around with the size a bit and the opacity to be able to make it bigger so we can get those real big color blocks. Properties, again, I like to increase that maximum size just so we don't have to work as hard to color big enough spaces. And then we can go ahead and name this brush our color brush. And of course, sign our name. Test it out a bit, see how we like it. Test out all the different sizes we can use it in to see if we like how that is and to test the variability. Next up, we can go and make the stamp. So for this one, we're actually going to increase the spacing by quite a lot. So we're able to kind of get that stamp without having to worry about it putting down multiple blocks. And then we can go skip on over to shapes. And if we click import and go to our source library again, we can go see all the blocks that we have. There are a couple good ones to start off with, like our leaves there. There's also crystals, drips. We're gonna go ahead and go with this flower right up here. See how it kind of spaced out, so we can use it as just a stamp so we can put down things faster. Next up for green, you can absolutely leave it blank, or you can add some extra texture. And it's going to show up how it looks. And then you can test it around again. And that one you can absolutely leave it just how it is, or you can mess around with the maximum size, the minimum size, and the opacities. And name that our stamp brush, just to have it all clearly labeled. Sign our names. Now time to test it out. Now these stamp brushes are good if you're trying to fill in a background or do different things, or if you want to just include one little stamp but you don't want to have to take all the time to draw it out individually.